welcome everybody to this session here, the second session of Byron photography. If you can imagine it, you can capture it. So Byron is going to go through 3 different sections tonight, and I'll ask him to share his screen here in just a moment. But during each one of these, he'll kind of talk about the photo itself and how he took the photo and some of those kind of things. Again, we want to encourage you to write questions in the chat box if you have one, or if something really strikes you and you say, wow, that's terrific, you can write that in there too. That's great. We want you to enjoy this presentation. We'll have a chance to answer questions, ask questions and answer questions from Byron at the end. But again, there'll be like 3 sections, so there may be a question that ties to something there that we can do in the middle. So Byron, if you want to share your screen, go right ahead.
So the next 3 categories, all the photos we're going to see tonight are more fun type photos. When we did this last week, those are pretty heavy duty photos that we looked at. A lot of technique involved. Tonight's are a little lighter, and some of them are kind of funny. Hopefully, I always like to put a little humor in photos if possible. And I'm just going to throw this out. There was a question last week where the person asked, how do I get inspired to shoot photos? And I just wanted to answer that really quickly. And that is, I'm a member of a photo group. There's 7 of us in the group, and we do a photo every week. So we have a theme every week. And what I do, I'll look at the theme, and quite often I'll just go online and I'll Google the theme, or I'll say photos on, and then whatever the theme is. And I'll look through that, see what other people have done. And then from that, if there's something really spectacular, I might try to duplicate the shot. But most of the time, I look at what other people have done, and then I do my own version of that shot. So that's where a lot of inspiration comes from. All right, so this category is trick shots. So these are pictures that I took with a camera, but it didn't end there. I had to do a lot more to it usually. So the first one, this is a picture, and this was from my weekly photo club I'm a member of. The theme was garden gnome. What am I going to do about a garden gnome? Well, a friend of mine owns this little statue of a comedian called W.C. Fields. And so I took the photo in his front yard, and then I came home and I found a picture of a friend of mine. And I just cut out his face, and using Photoshop, I put his face on top of the little ceramic statue. And within Photoshop, there's a blend feature. You can change the opacity of in this case, the face layer. So I brought that down a little bit. So if you looked at the photo closely, his skin has a real ceramic look to it, because it's bringing some of that ceramic through the skin. So that's kind of funny. This particular friend doesn't necessarily like this picture. I've watched him react when I show this to people, but I think it's funny. So that was my submission that week. This is a shot where I was looking at this really high-end cookbook, and in fact, the photos were so good that the man had to produce a separate book just on photos of the cookbook. And he had a picture of ketchup flying through the air towards a bunch of French fries. So I thought, I'm going to see if I can do something like that. So to do this one, the bottle that you see is mounted on a stand, so it's not going anywhere. I think I even used a hose clamp to hold it up there, if I'm not mistaken. And this is in my garage. It was totally dark. I had a black background behind it. And how I took this picture was very much like the painting with light, where the shutter of the camera is open. And I wanted to trigger a flash unit to flash at the right time. Well, there's a app I use that there's an app, plus there's some hardware. It's a cable you plug into it, and then the other end connects to the flash unit. So when it hears the sound, it'll trigger the flash. So I set the camera up, I pre-focused, shut off all the lights, and at the moment I squeezed the ketchup bottle, I just said, ha, to make it loud enough. And sure enough, the flash triggered, And then I shut the shutter, and this was my first exposure, my first take. And I tried it, I think, 2 more times. But I liked the first one best. Now I had a light mounted above the ketchup bottle, a big soft light it's called. So the light is shining through this diffusion material. And the other part of this story is I didn't want to get my garage floor all messy. So I put a plastic bucket on the floor, just guessing. How far does ketchup fly when you squeeze a bottle? I don't know. I've never done that before. But in the dark, I squeezed it and I heard the ketchup land in the bucket. So I didn't have any cleanup to do after the project was over. So that was fun. And then we shot the French fries. About 20 minutes later, my wife went to McDonald's and got some fries, and I left everything the same. I just put them in that place and shot an exposure of that and combined the two. So, and then ate them afterwards. So this is a friend of mine, and this is once again one of my weekly theme photos. The theme was Joker. I'm supposed to do something with the theme Joker. So I had this friend of mine, sit down and pretend like he's playing a card game. And if you notice, the Joker has a Joker. That's actually a picture of me from years ago. Put that on the Joker card. But I had to do several things with this picture. The biggest thing was I didn't like the way his beret looked when I photographed it in that room. So I had him go outside, and I brought the camera with me, and I tried to get him at the same angle, his head at the same angle, and I just had sunlight hitting the beret. So I took that picture, cut out the beret, and put that one on his head to replace the original one, because this has a lot more texture to it. You can see the beret. Other things that I did, the table wasn't quite wide enough, so using Photoshop, I widened out the gray felt looking table. And the background wasn't quite out of focus enough, so I just had to cut out around him, and then in Photoshop, using a blur tool, just blur that, just to give it, to set him apart from that background a little more. So that one had a lot of post-production work. This is a fairly simple photo to do, but I think it's pretty striking. I took a close-up of the skin of the basketball, and then I shot another picture of the entire basketball, and I laid the 2 layers on top, and then and it wasn't much of a picture, and then I got the idea of taking the shadow, creating a shadow, and running it all around the basketball just to see what would happen. And I really liked it. It to me gives it a look like the ball had been flying and it flew into that surface and it's being absorbed by that. So that's something that just adding that little shadow can give the photo a whole new look. And that's probably the best part of this photo, is that illusion that the skin is going down. And this is a church in Minneapolis. It's the Westminster Presbyterian Church, downtown Minneapolis. It's really old. And I went in there to hear somebody speak last year. And I walked in that room and I thought, wow, I have to take a picture of this room somehow. So I called ahead. I got permission to go in there on a weekday and shoot this photo. I shot it from the balcony. And now you might think I just set my camera up and took a picture and there we have it. But it wasn't quite that easy, because even though I had a wide angle lens, it wasn't as wide as what you see here. So I started in the middle, took a picture, then I moved the camera about half a frame, took another one, another half frame, took another one. And so I had 6 across there. And then I had to go up and shoot. So I ended up with 24 individual photos that are all stitched together here to make this one, it's a panorama, I guess you could call it, of this room, but it captured that entire room. So once again, thanks to Photoshop, I was able to come up with a nice looking image. this was just a fun experiment that I wanted to try to do. This is a brass airplane, and it's mounted outside of an Air Force base in California. And so I had that picture, and that plane has a stand that holds it up. And so my challenge was, can I eliminate that stand and make it look real? Like can I make this plane look like it's really flying? Like it turned and it just missed the ground and it's heading back up. And so it took me a while to eliminate that stand. And then I had to go down and adjust the shadow, because there was a shadow of the stand as well. And the tail was somewhat obscured. So with enough patience, you can do things like this. It makes it look like a brass airplane was flying around the airfield that day. And this one, I think this was near St. Patrick's Day, and you could buy a bag of green M&Ms. And what I was curious about was, would my TV work as a background? And so I laid out the M&Ms on a cookie sheet, and I took a picture of this big pan of M&Ms, and I put that up on my TV. So it's just displaying this big green field of M&Ms. Then I took this M&M dispenser and put it on that same cookie sheet and put it on a tray in front of the TV. And then to light it, you can see, if you look in the upper right of the M&M dispenser, it looks like a white, there's a white light with black lines in it. I was using a softbox it's called a gridded softbox. So there's a grid of little cloth strips in front. It just helps control the direction of the light. So you can see that in the reflection, and it's giving light from the upper right. And then on the left, that's just ambient room light that's reflecting off of him. And so I put it in front of the TV, and when you're going to shoot an image off a TV screen, it has to be slower than a 30th of a second. So I would say even go a 20th of a second or slower in order for it to pick up the entire screen. If you go faster, you're only going to get part of the screen, or you might get black lines. It's not going to look so good. So you have to use a slower speed to let that light in. So I just compensated for that. When you use Flash doesn't care what shutter speed you're using up to the maximum. It doesn't care how slow you use a shutter speed. It cares about what aperture you're using. So I had to match an aperture with a 20th of a second, and so the light would all balance out. Okay, so that was that category. Now these are lucky shots, and if you're going to be a photographer, sometimes you have to depend on luck to get good shots. This first one, now Mr. Acre would be familiar with this. This is Highway 34 between Barnesville and Pelican Rapids. And I was driving, we're looking westbound in this picture, but I was going east. And as I was driving, this sunflower caught my eye as I drove by. I thought, wait a minute, I can't not take a picture of this. So I had to do a U-turn and took a picture of this. And this was back in the 80s when I took this with a film camera. And I've always liked this picture. So I hung on to the picture, and then later on I digitized it. So it's always within easy reach now. But there was nothing special about it. There was no trickery. This isn't in the previous category of trick shots. This is a lucky shot. This happened to be there. Now, I have wondered if I were to shoot it again, if I would do it differently. Maybe shoot it a little bit lower. I'm not sure, but this does emphasize the sunflower. And this is another road, Highway 108. And this is a tree that I've known my whole life. My mom grew up about a mile from this point. And for some reason, the tree was a big deal to the whole family. And this hill, this is the highest point of that area. And so I had some cousins that said I should take pictures of this tree at different seasons. And so I thought that was a good idea. So I've been photographing this tree in different ways. This just happened to be, I was up in that area and the sky, it was just a clear sky. And as the sun was coming down, you can see how orange that was. It was pretty spectacular. So as you can see, I'm standing in the road, which is on a hill. So that's probably not a real great idea. But the sun is behind the tree, and it just seemed like that was the time to take the picture. And the foreground where the road is, I actually lightened that up a little bit in using Lightroom. I just lightened that up just to so you get a feeling for what's in the foreground. And this is the same tree on a different day. I was in that area and I really wanted to get a nice sunset picture with that tree. And happened, the one night I was there, I happened to get a nice sunset. With the sunset looks like an eye looking at me. I think that's kind of cool. And this is a lucky shot just because I had just purchased the lens that I was using for this camera. And I drove to a nearby park that has a lake in it. And I just walked around and the sky was nice. And there's two people fishing on the pier over there, not the pier, the dock over there. And I like the way this lifeguard chair is in the foreground. So I gave my wide angle lens a test that afternoon, and I think it passed the test. It's a nice peaceful photo. I was lucky to get that picture. And this is one. This is once again back in the 80s. This is with Ektachrome slide film. I was in Brainerd, Minnesota at the racetrack. They have a track called Brainerd International Raceway. And the announcer announced that one of the drivers of the race car also will be flying his P-51 Mustang over the track. So we were supposed to watch out for that. And I had a longer lens, not sure which one I was using back then, but I put the longest lens that I had on, and I was watching for this plane, and then through the trees, I could see him coming towards us. So I just put the camera, I had to guess at focus because we didn't have autofocus in those days, kind of guessing at focus I might want to use. And I put him in my viewfinder through the trees, and I just followed him, and he went almost directly over my head. So I just followed, and at this point, I clicked the shutter, and then boom, he went over my head. In a being slide film, I brought it back home, had to take it to the processor, wait 2 or 3 days, get the slides back and look at them, and I was really happy with this. The propeller is not in the face of the pilot, which was a little bit beyond my control to control where that was. But I liked the angle and I liked where I shot it. And the fact that I only had one click of the shutter to get this. Now with cameras today, it would be a little different. If you had a lens with a longer focal length, like a 200 millimeter probably, the cameras now would automatically focus on it. And as it's flying over, you could just hold your shutter button down and take 20 pictures of it as it flies over and then choose the best one. So I didn't have those options, but I still ended up with a photo that I really liked. In this, I just say it's lucky because I actually was out at this farm to shoot another project. And so I just put a GoPro camera on a tripod, and I said, take, I think it was 15-second exposures and do it continuously. And I set that up first, and then I went and worked on the other project for about it was probably an hour or so. And then I came back and shut off the GoPro camera. And when I put all the exposures together, this is what I ended up with, which being out in the dark farm like that, ended up with a pretty spectacular picture. There's a lot going on here. you know, a lot of distortion because that's a really super wide angle lens. So it turned out to be a fun picture. It was lucky. So this out in Oregon, out on the coast, I was just admiring the birds flying along, and so I just followed this one, shot his picture as he goes by, just admiring his shape, you know, his aerodynamic shape, and just the way the wings are elevated up a little bit from the body. And with those trees in the background, I don't know, to me it's a very peaceful photo. The light, as you can see, it was fairly overcast, but there is some direction. If you look at the bird, the light is hitting from the top, slightly behind the bird, and that's a favorite lighting position of mine. I like things that are lit that way. So it's soft light coming in from slightly from behind the subject. And this is one where this little hummingbird would land on that piece of cactus sporadically. He'd land on it and then he'd take off. And then a couple of minutes later, he'd land on it and take off. So I set up a flash unit about 10 feet from there. And then I set up my camera. I was actually inside a building at this time, but I set it up, had it on a tripod, I pre-focused it, and I was just waiting for him to come back. And sure enough, he landed and I would take pictures. And so every time I hit the shutter, the flash would go off. That's what froze his wing on the left side. You can see individual feathers that are still, and that's because the flash froze those. But over on the other side, the wing has got some blur to it. That's because the strobe light didn't, you know, it might have, his body caused a shadow where that wing is from the strobe. So that's just ambient light over there. Gives it an interesting look. And you can see the feathers, how iridescent they are. They reflect a color. So it was relatively lucky. I didn't place the bird there. He placed himself. So, and this was another one. I was trying to raise this type of plant, and I didn't have very good luck with it. Didn't have a very good crop of those, but I looked at it, and here's this ant who had visited, and it snapped shut on him, and it just looked like a struggle for life and death here. So I grabbed a camera and came out and photographed him, and I just watched. I didn't intervene. I thought, well, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And he managed to slip out of that after 10 minutes of struggling. So the ant won that, and then shortly after, my plant dried up, and I thought I'll have to talk with Mr. Acri about raising these, I guess. This is my dad, and this happened probably a year into me wanting to be a photographer. I was a student for a year, and I think this was taken in 1974 in the fall. And so I just had this picture in my mind. This is my dad checking out a wheat field. This is near our house. That's our driveway right behind him. So I actually had this picture in mind. I said, Dad, come out here before the sun sets. So he came out, and I told him what to do, what to look at. And I don't know, it's a nice picture of my dad. And ironically, he is the same age I am now in that picture. So, so whatever that's worth. But one thing I did that I find interesting, I did a little forensic work on this because I was wondering what would be the date of this picture. I thought it was 1974. Well, at home on a bigger screen, I could see his watch, and I could estimate, get an idea what time it was. And then looking at the sun, it's about 15 minutes from sunset. So I used my software to say, okay, if the sun sets at whatever, 7:30, what time of year is that? And then I also looked up what time is wheat harvested in that part of Minnesota. And I had estimated that this was probably August 9th of 1974. So I looked it up, and what I found, it said wheat is normally harvested August 7th through the 12th. So I'd estimated the 9th. So I'm going to go with that. So it was just kind of fun. It has nothing to do with photography, really, but it was kind of fun to try to figure out the exact date that was taken. This was taken just this past spring, not even spring, past winter, probably in late February. And this is at Joshua Tree State Park. There's an area called Keys View, which is up really high. And it's always very windy up there. And I was there with my wife and a friend of ours, and I was just looking over the scenery, and this friend of mine hit me with her elbow and said, "Look," and she pointed down to that scene of those two people. Now they're in an area, they're not supposed to be there. There's handrails that are supposed to keep you behind that, but they had crawled down there and were sitting on the rock, and the sun was shining on them, but not in the rest of the valley. You can see at the very top of the picture, that's the floor of the Coachella Valley. And so I took this photo, and just looking at the back of my camera, I thought, wow, I really like this picture. And I wandered off in it's this fairly small area. Well, a few minutes later, this friend of mine brings that couple over to me and says, here, these are the people you shot. So I got their contact information, and I sent them a high resolution version of this. So that she thanked me for it. And so I hope that I suggested making a large print. This is the kind of picture that needs to be really large, like a poster size picture. So did she do that or not? I don't know. I have no idea. But at least I was able to give them this photo, because I really enjoy this. This was a lucky shot. This was in a museum, and my wife and I were walking along, and this exhibit was in a separate room that was really dark. And this red circle thing was the art exhibit for that area. And it said, there was a little sign that said, you need to sit close to this to get the most out of it. And without her even knowing it, I just stepped back. I happened to have a camera with me, and just framed it and shot that picture. And to me, I like the circle, the size of that circle with her silhouette in there. And what's funny is friends of ours look at that and they know immediately who that silhouette is, because it just looks like her. So, so that's an example of a real spontaneous photo, but yet there's this real strong graphic element, this round circle, a round bright red circle. You don't normally see that with a silhouette in front. So I had to take it once again.
And the one comment was regarding the photo of your dad in the wheat field. Mm-hmm. And the comment was, "This is a great photo. I love how it's just a little bit out of focus." And maybe you want to talk about that sometimes, so that just that clarity, or sometimes not quite so clear.
Okay. When it's tack sharp like that, it can almost give it a sterile feel, or almost like it's not real, like you're shooting a picture of a mannequin or something. So that does happen. This was slightly soft for a couple of reasons. It was shooting directly into the sun with that lens. I don't think the lens was real good at handling this bright light that was coming from behind. So it's not going to give you this real sharp, sharp edges and things. And another thing is, I think that's a 135 millimeter lens on that camera that I was using, and I was hand holding it. So there is probably a little bit of blur. See, cameras now, they have image stabilization, either built into the lens or built into the camera body, or both sometimes. That did not exist back then. So it could very well be that there's a little bit of camera shake in that picture, because that would have been, 60th of a second, perhaps. I'm not sure, don't remember. And I was using a fairly wide aperture to try to throw the background out of focus too. But you're right. Sometimes a photo that's slightly soft like that can be a more attractive photo than where everything is super sharp. So.
Yeah, thanks for talking about that. And one more that related to this last group of pictures, and that was the one that was on the farm with the stars out. And the question was, why are there swirly lines? And there was a couple of responses: star trails, and something about the exposure being long enough for to have time for the stars to move. Do you want to talk just a little more about that
Sure.
photo again?
Okay. The camera was facing north, and you can tell it's facing north because Polaris is the star that all the other stars are revolving around. And so by using long exposures, I think, and like I said, I think these were 15-second exposures, but it would shoot one, then shoot the next, and shoot the next, and shoot the next, 15 seconds each. And so by doing that, I got this trail. By putting all those frames together, you get this trail of stars. Each star, if you look at each star, it's not all that long, but when you put a whole field of them together and they all move that much, it makes it look like a big circle. So there's that. And if you're wondering about across the sky, there's a red line that went across the sky. Well, that was an airplane flying by. And then there were red and white lines at the bottom, and that was just cars driving by. The white lights, the car was going that way. The red light, the car was going that way. So it had a little of everything in that picture. Okay, so art from common objects. This is something that once you've started taking pictures and start noticing things, you can just walk around the house or walk around out in the yard, and you'll see things that are interesting. Maybe the way things are put together, it's interesting, or the way that light is hitting something is interesting. So let's take a look at that. So this was just a pair of glasses sitting on a dining room table, and the sun was shining in through the window, and I thought this looks like a picture. So this is very simple. You're gonna have a table at your home, you're gonna have glasses at your home probably. And so give this a try when the sun is shining in, and see if you can get a photo like this. It's got this very strong, the shadow is a very strong graphical element there. And the hint is try to clean your glasses first before you take a picture of them, but that's just me. And now this is a very similar picture. It's really the same picture. It's the sun shining across some old paint that's peeling, and it casts a shadow down on the ground, but lots of texture and lots of detail in that picture. So it's fun to look at. And this is a photo. It's actually had some use. A friend of mine recorded a CD, and he used this as the artwork with his name and those songs listed over the top of this. And what this is, it's just food coloring at a clear vase of water. And we're just goofing around with this, putting different ink drops in the water and photographing it. And then I gave it a stir and photographed it. And I ended up with this picture, which I really enjoyed this picture because it looks like it's a solid flat piece, like it was painted on there. And there's a lot going on here too. Like on the left, it looks like a river flowing in on the lower half there. You got the red and the greens mixing together, and there's actually some white mixed in there, and then yellow below that. So you're seeing all these individual colors before the water got totally mixed together. It just was captured at a good time. And it's usually when people see this, they like it. They don't know what they're looking at, but they like the movement that shows and the colors that mix together. So you could try that. If you have a clear container and you have a little packet of food coloring, you know, drop them in there, put your camera on a tripod and photograph the food coloring. It'll sink in the water and it'll go different directions. Just kind of fun to do, a fun little experiment.
Byron, before you move on that one, there's just a comment or a question, and there says, "Is his reflection in the picture?" And I was trying to see it too when I saw the comments.
I don't think so. This was a round vase, and so if there was, it would be a really skinny.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Reflection. So this was one where these are tulips. They're not in full bloom yet, but they were sitting on a table, and the light was coming in through a large glass door, and it was real soft light that day. And so I shot this picture with the lens wide open, and by shooting with the aperture wide open, that throws the background out of focus. So you can see another tulip blossom in the back, and it's out of focus because I wouldn't have wanted all of this to be in focus. I just wanted mainly this top one to be in focus, and let everything else just go out of focus. It's a real soft blur in the background. But once again, this was a lucky shot. I didn't do anything to set this up other than see it, and then once again I put the camera on a tripod because I wanted to get it as sharp as possible, and it wasn't real bright. You know, it was called indirect lighting coming in. So the sun was probably still in the east, but this was a west-facing window. So light was coming through, but it was real soft, real diffused light. So I just focused on the top blossom and let everything else go out of focus. And this is a close-up. This is what happens if you have a camera that has a removable lens, you can buy something called extension tubes. And an extension tube you take the lens off the camera, attach the tube to the camera body, and then the lens to the other end of the tube. So it separates the lens from the camera body, and that allows you to shoot real close-up pictures like this. What else can I say? This is a blossom, and I was just looking for a way, you know, what looked most dramatic. And so I liked all these diagonal lines and the colors of the flower with the green in the background. I thought it was a nice contrast. And you'll notice there's pollen on the flower, and you're always going to get that. It's not really a good way to avoid that, so you just leave those in there. This was kind of the opposite of that previous picture. This is standing back a ways at some huge radio telescopes. This was taken in New Mexico. And this was a lucky shot because these radio telescopes are mounted on railroad tracks, and there are 3 of them that go out from the center. And what they told us was that the day that I happened to be there, they were in the A position. So they're as close together as they can get. If we'd come on another day, they might be in a different position. I believe each track goes out 11 miles. So it's possible that radio telescope on the right could have been 11 miles away. And then the other 2 are evenly spaced. The other 3 are evenly spaced to get back to the main building. So I was lucky that they were all close together, and it made a kind of a forceful picture, kind of an interesting picture of technology at work and engineering at work. I don't see any people in there, but they're doing their thing. It's called the Very Large Array is the name of this facility, and it's in It's in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. That's all I've got. This is the final slide for tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, Byron. The great photos, and it certainly has generated some comments in here. And so I'm going to try and highlight those questions that we didn't do in between there, if I can. One of the early ones that came on was, and so I will tell everyone that if you didn't get to know that yet, Byron answered the questions last week, actually in written form, and those will be posted, and I'll show you where. A couple of you that sent in photos, I have managed to send you those notes as well. But anyway, in it, one of the first questions was, what type of Photoshop do you use most often?
What type of Photoshop? I subscribe to Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom. It's a package deal, and you subscribe to that now. They used to sell it separately. So you'd buy this box and there'd be a disc in there that had Photoshop, but now you subscribe and it's $10 a month, and you always get the most current version, because when there's an update, they just send it out, and your Photoshop updates. So to answer the question, I use Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom, the combination.
And I will tell you that Byron did send a list of the software that he uses, and that is posted. And again, I'll show you that in just a little bit. A question, do you have any, quote, good books for beginning photography that you'd recommend?
Okay, for beginning photography, I'm going to post that later. Right off the top of my head, I remember books that we had when I went to school back in the 70s. Some of that still applies, but I'm going to have to look into that, and then I'll give you a written list of some good books.
Great. Yep, thank you. And then a couple of questions relating to equipment. The question was, do you need a tripod, or maybe a better way to ask this is, when do you need a tripod?
When do you need? I would say yes, you do need a tripod, and the last time I bought a new tripod was years ago, because a tripod really isn't that expensive, because you can look at garage sales, and that's a good one. We'll just stop there. At a garage sale, lots of people are selling things, and you can often find a tripod and you pay $5 for it. And it's not going to be this real sturdy carbon fiber, $800 tripod. It's going to be for $5, but it'll work. It'll be sturdy enough to hold your camera. So that's the first place I would look. Now, when do you use a tripod? Whenever you're using a slow shutter speed, like the tulip picture I had, the tulips in the window. If I had taken that handheld, it probably wouldn't be as sharp. There would be some camera shake in that picture. If you have a zoom lens, whenever you're zoomed at the telephoto end, you probably should use a tripod. So whenever it's a slow shutter speed or a telephoto lens. Or the third one is if you're shooting repeating photos of something and then you want to combine them, like for example, the star pictures. Those were many exposures put together. Well, if you don't have a tripod, you can't do a picture like that. It's not gonna work. So.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of discussion going on in there having to do with equipment, and of course, you started the whole series when we first started talking about how you prefer not to talk so much about equipment, but rather using your imagination.
Right.
But the question in there was, someone asked, well, do you need a camera with a lot of fancy settings to do these kind of things? And there was some comments in between, well, that kind of reflected your philosophy. Well, imagination may be more important than the
Absolutely.
camera. But any comments there you want to make to the group right now?
The reason that there are expensive cameras is that they have tools built into them that make things easier to do. But do you have to have them? No, absolutely not. if you have a camera where you can change the shutter speed and you can change the aperture, that's really all you need. You can go from there, and you can be really creative. And if you look at the painting with light series, where I used just a little flashlight to light these flowers, you know, if you think of it that way, if you have a tripod and a camera and a little flashlight, you can make some stunning pictures. That's all you need. So no, you don't need lots of expensive equipment to make good pictures.
Great. So Byron, I'm going to have you stop sharing right now, and then
Okay.
while you're answering the next couple of questions, I'll put up a couple of slides for information here. But what here's a question which is certainly subjective, but the question was, what makes a picture good?
Okay. What makes a picture good is if the moment you look at a picture, you know exactly what you're supposed to look at. So the subject is very clear what you're supposed to look at. Sometimes you'll see a picture and you'll look at it and you'll say, what am I supposed to see here? Am I supposed to notice what's in the foreground? Am I supposed to notice what's in the background? I'm not sure. So make it a photo where the subject is perfectly clear what you're supposed to see. I guess you could just stop at that point. And then the other things about lighting it properly are something that'll make the photo better. But just make sure that your subject is very clear.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm going to share a couple of slides here. Of course, this is a repeat of you know, if you didn't get a chance to jot where you were from at the beginning. But I wanted to do a couple of things and start by saying a huge thank you, Byron, for spending another night with us to do this. And these have been great. With your knowledge and your photos that you've taken, this is really fun for me. And I'm generally looking at the comments, I would say that everyone out there is enjoying it. So I hope everyone can
and this is equally fun for me to do this.
Well, great. Well, we really do appreciate it. So now let me, I said that I would share the resource on our 4-H webpage at the 4-H that we've got during this COVID-19 thing, a lot of different kind of programming. So we've set up a page within there, and underneath the resources, there's some things. And if you see exploring photography, it was exploring the photography of Byron Braton, but that part got cut off. But the Zoom sessions here. But then here's the recording from last week, and then we will be posting that actually the list of equipment or software that you used is actually part of that Zoom recording there. There's that list is there, and then the link to the recording, so you can find that, and then we will post those questions that you answered last time here there as well. And then of course there'll eventually be another recording for this week. So on our webpage, everybody, and if you look for 4-H COVID-19 and then resources, you'll find that. And then the other thing I wanted to show you was, here's some of the photos you did from last week. And so first I want to thank Shaylin, Jennifer, Sophia, and Yolanda for sending in photos. Anything jump out at you, Byron?
The bubble photo, it looks like right in the middle, it looks like a planet.
Okay. Yep.
I enjoy that. Well, they're all good. You know, the leaf in the upper left there, the weed in front of the sun, that's cool. Yeah,
and actually that one came as a part of 3. So there was, and they kept moving in a little closer and adjusting. So that was the first one, and the one down in the corner was the last one. I see. I chose to put out a couple of those, and then as you can see, there were a couple other experiments with light.
Now the cat picture in the lower left, what they're doing absolutely correct there is, when you take a picture of something, like in this case the cat, get at their level. So your camera is at eye level to the cat. Because you see so many where people are standing straight up and then taking a picture down at the cat. Well, this is way more interesting.
Yep, very good, very good.
So these are all good.
Yeah, so yes, thank you again for those of you that submitted those. And I'm going to put the same challenge out again this week. If you want to take a picture, and it could reflect any of the sessions that we had last week, or just a favorite photo of yours, or if you want to concentrate on lucky shots, shots from common objects, trick shots, you can certainly do that. And if you send them to me again, I'll try and put together another little montage of those photos. So, but I did want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. I really appreciate the ones that were sent in. And again, Byron, we thank you very much for what you're doing for us. I'm going to stop the share here now and just take one more quick look and see if there's any other comments, questions that I should throw at you right now. Otherwise, we'll call this an evening. But what a great session!
Okay.
A lot of great comments, Byron. They're learning a lot. So here's one. Would you recommend the regular extension tube that uses my lens, or an extension tube that has the focus points on it? Now, I'm not sure if I fully understand what that means, but
I'm not sure what that means either. The focus tubes I'm used to are just a plain tube. So you move the lens to one end and the camera body to the other.
Okay, so
I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to take a look at that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So, and again, I'll share those with you in written form. So,
okay.
And there were a couple of questions about the good books, and you said you were going to come back to that, but there were a couple of suggestions in here, and I'm going to see if I can find them real quick. Where I went past those here. Just a minute. Here's one: How to Create Stunning Digital Photography by Tony Northrup. Okay.
Okay. I know who he is.
And then I know there was another suggestion. Let's see if I can find that one. It was the Beginner's Guide to Photography. Let's see if I might be going by, but again, I will have these notes available to everyone. And for that matter, folks, if you send me a photo, I'll have your email. I'll send you some of that directly. But even if you don't want to send in a photo, but just want that, feel free to email me and say, hey, can I have that list of questions and resources, and I'll be glad to send that. Here it goes. The Beginner's Photography Guide is what I use. It didn't say by whom. So so there's a couple of ones to take a look at. So yeah, I think that's about where. Somebody said, can we send more than one photo? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Depending on how many I get, I may put several up there, or I may just take one, depending on what I can do. But I'll try and make kind of one montage of whatever I get this week for everybody. So that's going to be it for tonight, folks. Thank you very much for participating. I'm glad that you were willing to spend an hour with us this evening. Byron, again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your photos. It's really fun for me, and judging by the comments, I think for everyone that was on the line.
Okay,
so we'll call this good, and see you next week.
Okay, see ya.
All right. Bye, everybody.